Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're here today to discuss Nissan's sustainability and climate strategy, as well as investor engagement on Climate Action 100 Plus. Let me briefly introduce our distinguished speakers. To my right is Mr. Joji Tagawa, Chief Sustainability Officer at Nissan. And next to him is, Mr. Drew Hambly, Investor Director and Head of Corporate Governance at CalPERS. And finally, Mr. Minoru Matsubara, Chief Sustainability Officer and Managing Executive Officer at Resona Asset Management. Thank you very much. Okay, since we only have 25 minutes, which is quite short, I'd like to kick off the panel discussion right away. So let's start off with Tagawa-san.
Yep.
So Nissan has been a pioneer of EV strategy with the launch, obviously, of the famous Leaf in 2010. But there has been concern lately about whether Japanese car makers in general, I guess, are falling behind in this transition. Could I start off by asking about Nissan's electrification strategy and also whether you think this is an unfair characterization to say that Japan is falling behind in this shift to EVs?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the comment and thank you for calling us as a pioneer of electric vehicle. So as you said, we have started electric vehicle, the model name Nissan Leaf, back in December of 2010. And since then, we've been promoting and pushing. But I think it is true, like you said, current EV volume for us is not the leading position. Actually, Tesla, as you know well, and also like many Chinese makes, like a BYD, are leading the volume of the electric vehicle. And of course, Tesla has a great advantage because of a great leader and then having many investment, probably some of from you, that enable them to make a massive investment. Even their annual cash flow is negative, a profit is red ink. They were able to continue to do so. And also like Chinese makes like a BYD and others, they also get fairly good support from government. Of course, we do get support from Japanese government. We have some colleagues from Japanese government, so I don't want to criticize. But I think the level of maybe support, particularly for like electric vehicle in Japan, is still probably a little behind from others. But Nissan has established EV footprint in many parts of the globe. Like we have an EV production in Japan, US, Europe, and China. And we also have a battery procurement for many, many locations. So that's why I think it is true that our current volume is a little behind, but we still have a good footprint. And also because we started early, many battery currently coming back as a second hand. The majority of the battery is still from Nissan because current volume is high, but their battery is only coming back like 5 years, 7 years, 10 years down the road. So we have a good experience of utilizing second-hand battery, not only for the vehicle use, but also for like a disaster recovery to completely other use. So that is something that we have been focusing on, and we want to take the advantage.
I see. Okay. So you did talk about, having this experience in the reuse of batteries, and that has given you an edge. But you also talked earlier about the subsidies in Japan and, the difference between obviously different countries. So, how do you see the challenges to your climate and sustainability strategy? And for example, in terms of not just the subsidies, but different environmental regulations that are, globally, it's very different. What kind of challenge is that for you?
Yeah, it is a big challenge for sure, because not only by the current geopolitical situation, but Europe is obviously leading, like setting up a regulatory framework, like including battery, like a regulation, and also for the vehicle and EV, like a regulation. but also that triggers like a USA to coming up with Inflation Reduction Act,
Yes.
which requires all of like other global OEM to make an investment. And of course, Nissan, as a Japanese company, we want to make an investment in Japan and make battery and electric vehicle. But the current regulatory framework is making us difficult to justify
Yes.
to make appropriate return on the investment in Japan. But currently, as we are discussing with Japanese government, the government is also trying to introduce attractive framework for at least Japanese company to make an investment in Japan. Of course, like IRA and Europe regulatory framework invited many investment from overseas, but at least it is good if we have a framework for Japanese company to make an investment in Japan, and at least to satisfy the volume or demand to a Japanese consumers at
I
minimum.
see. Great, thank you. I love to involve, obviously, the investor side of the view as well. And so let's start off with Drew. So how do you see, I mean, we talked about climate action 100 plus. So how do you see the progress made so far with this initiative? And which areas do you think, companies are delivering? And which areas are they falling behind?
Yeah, thank you very much. So as I think many of you know, the CA 100 was a coalition of investors getting together and looking at the most systematic carbon emitters in our portfolios, and then working together in partnership. And I'd like to take a moment to thank our partner, Resona Bank, who co-leads this engagement with Nissan, which has been terrific in giving us access to the team over the last few years through this. So what I think we've been the most successful early on was awareness. Now this goes back to 2017-18. So governance with the board of directors, awareness, GHG emission disclosure, setting targets. And if we look at the progress over the last 5 years, I believe just over 75% of the companies that we've collectively engaged with have adopted a net zero ambition. And then 90% of the companies that we identified have added TCFD reporting, which was one of the things that investors pushed for. So I think some of those disclosure governance issues, there's been a lot of great progress through the CA 100. Now, sort of the next steps is thinking about capital allocation, thinking about absolute reduction in greenhouse gases, which is something that we're going to be tackling in this next phase. And as we've seen up on the signs today, time to go from commitment to action. And so I think that'll be the next big push in an area that we haven't had as much success with yet, but will be an area of focus for the coalition going forward.
I see. Great. Thank you. So as we move on to this phase of implementation, I would like to ask Matsubara-san as well. Let me switch to Japanese. じゃあ松原さんに
Let me ask Mr. Matsubara at this juncture. Now, in the conversation with the companies, there will be some challenges in ESG. Are there any gaps between investors versus the companies? What are the gaps? And why such gaps are happening? If you have any opinions. Thank you very much for the question. So when I have a conversation with the companies, then there are 3 major gaps, in my opinion. First gap is the gap in timeline or time, and the second is gap in value, and the third is gap in culture per se. So these are the 3 gaps. Both of us have a role for the diverse stakeholders, and therefore it is unavoidable to have such gaps. And engagement will reduce the size of the gap. And through engagement, we need to reduce the gaps. And in such an efforts, the perspective of banks or investors versus the perspective of Tagawa-san or other Japanese companies are different. The first is to take an instance of a gap in times. The short-term and long-term targets are different, and the companies will have to attain both at the same time. And investors are taking different perspective on the time. And that is perhaps the type of gap that we can minimize through conversation. That is the first stage, at least, in my opinion. And after that, as Drew mentioned earlier, when we take a step to change from commitment to action. So I think that we need to commit to action and commit to implementation. I believe that the second stage is the stage for the action. And for the companies to take actions, from investors' point of view, how can we promote and support the company's efforts? And that will be the critical stage as a second stage.
Especially in the time frame is very interesting. I mean, I'd like to hear your general view on what you think about these gaps, but also, I mean, how do you balance the investor expectations? You obviously need to deliver on your short-term financial performance as well, with the longer-term goals for climate and sustainability.
Yes, first of all, it has been excellent experience to have engagement and dialogue through Climate Action 100 Plus, and also individual meeting that we have with CalPERS and Resona and all other investors all over the world, because it still tends to be the case, like the regular meeting for investor relations. Many topic about cash flow, many topic about profit on a short term, 2 years, 3 years down the road, and massive investment, maybe as a concern as opposed to like an opportunity. But I think company is obligated to make a comprehensive and more understandable disclosure. And if we are able to provide necessary information to investor, not only for the regular automotive business, but also for the sustainability activities and climate challenge, including, for example, like I mentioned briefly on a second-hand battery, which is not the core business in the past. But we have been utilizing, for example, battery as a disaster recovery. May not be an excellent profit opportunity, but good for like maybe human rights and others. And if investor can have maybe sympathy and also like agreement for Nissan to make such an investment, and may not produce massive profit in the next year or two, then as mentioned at the beginning as an example of Tesla, you know, we may continue to push for our strategy for the climate and for the sustainability. But I'm not only asking, you know, force you to understand what Nissan is doing, but we are also responsible for doing more comparable and timely disclosure and easier to explain the strategy and action plan so that the investor can maybe make a good decision for the mid to long term.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I mean, Tagawa-san talked about, you know, improving the timely disclosure, and you talked about disclosure being an improvement in the first phase. But as we go into this, you know, the second phase, how do you see the engagement, the nature of engagement with companies changing in order to, you know, actually make sure that implementation is taking place?
Yeah, and the way we're thinking about this is the opportunity set. So I believe in 2022, EVs, global EV sales worldwide surpassed hybrids for the first time. So we see this as a long-term solution. I think the IEA in their report that came out a week or two ago said in 2030, if we have 65% of our vehicles EVs on the mobility trajectory, that should keep us at 1.5. What we've seen in some of the modeling from some of the OEMs is maybe 30 to a third of their fleet, not 65%. So we'd like to take this next phase of engagement to really focus on the opportunity set available. And as a long-term investor, as a public pension fund, we'd like to take as long a lens as we can and not worry about the next 2 or 3 years, but extend that lens, at least on this, to 2030, 2035, as companies make these investments that we think are really going to pay off for the longer term.
Right. Okay. I guess, you know, as we go into the final discussion of how to reduce these gaps, I mean, we've identified the gaps while we were discussing today. So what can we, what can actually be done to mitigate these differences now that we know, and then accelerate the process towards this implementation that we've been talking about? Shall I start off with Tagawa-san again on this one?
Yes. I think everybody has the same goal of 2050 carbon neutral, and the challenge or action needed for the climate change. And then one single company or even one single industry can only do certain things. But if we can have a collaboration, cross work across the industry, across the company, and across the kind of stakeholders, we are able to achieve faster and even bigger and like a good progress. In the automotive world, we have so many examples of such a collaborative work necessary. For example, like life cycle assessment. There's no certain kind of method as of today how to calculate the life cycle carbon footprint. But if we can come up with like a standard, then you can easily assess. System development is the next things. In the automotive carbon footprint, like scope 1, 2, 3, almost like 95%, 98% is a scope 3. So, of course, we can calculate our own carbon footprint, our own activities, but we need to rely on the information from suppliers, information from partners, and even information from consumers who are driving, like an electric vehicle or other vehicle. So, that sense, I think not only among Japanese, but also across the globe, we can do many things. And I want to add one more thing. Like in electric vehicle, we are facing challenges for that mineral and natural resources. And of course, the price is high. The kind of like a limited supply. So we can collaborate with many other government and also many other like corporation to get sources, and also working for the circular economy, like a recycle, reuse of those precious metals.
I guess the geopolitical situation is also making it even harder for those natural resources, isn't it?
Are you going in that discussion?
just briefly.
There's many challenges because of current geopolitical situation. The price gets so high. But recently it's getting stabilized. So it's difficult for us to control those like a price fluctuation, not only price of natural resources, but also, for example, like dollar yen is almost 150 yen as of today. Usually, like exporters like a Nissan is a beneficiary, but currently we are importing many metals and material from overseas. So the benefit is offset. So we can of course discuss on separately about those political situations, but definitely that's a huge challenge for our industry too.
Okay, great, thank you. So Tagawa-san talked about industry-wide alliance as a possible solution. But Drew, from your perspective, what do you think could be the, not new, but just solutions for filling this gap that obviously will exist between investors and companies?
Yeah, and I think like many of the other investors out here that use engagement as this tool is we're looking at our entire portfolio. And so while we're having productive engagements with Nissan, we'll also be trying to talk to other OEMs, talk to other people in the supply chain with the same kind of long-term message. And encouraging them all to work together. And I was encouraged today, I think I read something today that there's a consortium of 20 companies that thinks they can extract recycled batteries and extract some of the minerals and in solving some of these challenges. So using that portfolio lens and our reach through hundreds of companies that we'll engage with, that's kind of a tool in our toolkit that we can apply to help with this sort of working together.
Right, I see. Okay. Matsubara-san.
Then I'd like to ask Mr. Matsubara at this juncture. Now then, being a realistic solution, engagement can provide a very good solution. Stepping into the next phase, what needs to be changed? What is new? Thank you for the question. It is probably that we need to share and resonate with the objectives, shared objectives. The objective of a corporation is what do we communicate to the future, and also what do we promise for the future? That is what we are trying to do. We need to promise and offer the more affluent life for the future. That is the tasks and responsibility that is we are obliged to, or we are given to. So in order to share the common goals, we need to depict a picture of what we need to bring about in the future, what we need to realize in the future. What is what we trying to provide, and we need to commit to that and try to reduce the gap so that we can discuss in great detail of how we need to have common objectives. Otherwise, action will not be common either. So we will share the commitment or objectives, and in order to realize that objectives, we need to take action as a result that will be a common. That is important in my opinion. Now, in regard to the big objectives, I believe that companies and investors are sharing already. But what you say about the common objective is, do you also include the implementation methods that also needs to be shared? Yes, your point exactly. But from our point of view, like the Nippon Life President Shimizu-san mentioned earlier, we all have to be a future maker. And for in the shoe of a future maker, what we would want out of companies, and the solution or answer to that question will lie among ourselves, and also it is partly on Tagawa-san as well. And what does it mean for us to be a future maker? And for that answer, we need to resonate each other. Once we resonate with each other, then next stage would be taking action, as I believe. Thank you very much.
Which is quite surprising. So I'd like to add some additional questions. So if one of you could volunteer. This hasn't been happening in Japan too much, but obviously in Europe and US, there has been some debate about the ESG backlash and how that's going to affect the longer term goals. How do you see this movement? There has been a backlash, and it looks like it's subsiding, but it's still there. Where are we now on this?
Drew.
I'll go. All right. So certainly the anti-ESG crowd has some wind at their sails. The way we like to think about this, if you've ever sailed, that the winds change. What we're finding through our engagement program is most of the companies we're talking to are still working hard toward these goals. They might be doing it a little more quietly than they had in the past, but are still allocating capital, still trying to execute their strategy, and trying to, drown out some of the noise that we're hearing. And so I think if companies and investors keep doing that and know what's good for the long term, some of this backlash, I think, will eventually swing the other way. So we're not overly worried about it. I mean, we're certainly under getting pressure from our own Congress, providing records and whatnot on our activities through CA 100.
Right.
But to the companies out there, I think are really trying hard to stay on track, like you are. And so we keep encouraging that, and hopefully the winds will change quickly.
松原さん、日本ではどう思いますか？
Matsubara-san, what do you think is the situation in Japan? I don't think such a trend is not that evident in Japan. What do you think? Well, yes, I agree. In that sense, I think Japan is, of course, affected by what is going on in the world. But as for us, it should not be a means to an end. I mean, it's in order to achieve sustainability for the company, what is the point in us pursuing ESG? I think we all need to be ready to give an answer to that. That is what is being asked for from us. It's not that the answer is found in the society. It's all about what we as a company want to achieve sustainability. Why is it that we want to achieve sustainability? And in order to achieve sustainability, is ESG necessary or is it not necessary? It's that kind of fundamental question that we're being asked of. And the fact that we have these questions, I think, strengthens our position.
I think that wraps up our discussion for today. So thank you so much for this very insightful discussion.
Very nice. Very nice.
Thank you so much.
ありがとうございました。